Good day, all. Welcome to Critical Faculty. I'm your host, Hani Salim. Today, we want to honor a fantastic man who's produced so many ideas and thought-provoking principles in psychology, in philosophy, and neuropsychology, and neurophilosophy. Is the great Daniel Dennett. And I think I've got just the right person to honor his memory, not just because he was a good friend of his, but also because he happened to be interested and specialize in the same topics. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Michael Shermer. Hello, Dr. Michael Shermer. How are you?
Hello, Hanny. How are you?
Great to see you.
Likewise.
Fantastic. Just before we get into the depth of this great man's thoughts, so maybe you want to tell your views a little bit about what you've been up to lately.
Oh, well, so, producing the podcast, the Michael Shermer Show, two episodes a week. And we're getting about 100,000 people per episode now, so that's pretty good. And it's mostly authors of new nonfiction books. And these are books, publishers, now that I'm on the radar, send me books every day. But these are books I would want to read anyway. So it's kind of fun to have that at the ready where I get to talk to the author, which is how I started the podcast in the first place. These are people I'd love to just sit and chat with about their books. And now I get to do it thanks to the, there you go on the page there. The podcast platforms are so effective now and cheap, and the reach is so broad. Also editing issues of Skeptic Magazine. We always have, another one in the works every 3 months. Got to crank out a new issue, and they're thematic now. Since we redesigned the magazine and moving a little bit away from traditional old school skeptical topics like UFOs and Bigfoot and astrology and psychics and ESP and the paranormal and the supernatural and religion and all that, we've migrated over toward more cultural, political, economic issues. So we did trans matters, and then abortion matters, and then race matters, then nationalism, and then economics and energy and health. Let me see, what else have we got in the works there? Energy, nuclear energy. So, the new one is on AI. Of course, that's a hot topic.
Of course.
And then my books, my next book, I'm just finishing up now, like this weekend. I'm going to turn it in next week, the manuscript. It's called Truth, What It Is, How to Find It, Why It Matters. So there I deal with basically how reason, rationality, and science work, the scientific method, rationality, Bayesian reasoning, signal detection theory, correlation and causation, how to determine causation, confounding variables, experimental controls, just the gold standard of, blind, double blind condition, all that stuff. And then I shift to talking about applying it. So that's just the first third, applying it to different issues like religious truths, myths, literary truths, political, economic truths, history, mythology. How should we think about those parts of human knowledge and culture from a rational perspective? And then in the last third, I talk about the big questions. That is free will and determinism, consciousness, the hard problem of consciousness, God, the existence of God or not, the God question. And then the final one, why there is something rather than nothing, the big existential existence question. And so that's it. I'm just wrapping up, rereading the chapters one last time before I set it in. And from there, it'll be about a little over a year before
get published.
It's out. It's being published by Johns Hopkins University Press. And
right.
That's a very prestigious press, but it's peer reviewed. So you got to send the manuscript out to 3 reviewers, and
right.
According to their comments, which is good. I'm glad to have that.
Yeah.
And so it'll be out in fall of 2025.
This is fantastic. You've been leading a very busy life. Folks, the description of Skeptic Magazine's YouTube channel is in the description of the video. Please have a look. I was just displaying it a moment ago. Invaluable information. So much information there with different authors, different thoughts, psychology, philosophy, physics, you name it. It's all there. Truth, is it a capital T or a small T? Because I think the ontological
book titles, unless you're E. E. Cummings, they start with a capital T, truth. But in fact, that's an important point, because there are no capital T truths in science. They're small t. Provisional is the key.
Professional.
Claims or theories or ideas for which the evidence is so substantial, it would be reasonable for you to offer your provisional assent that it's true, with a small t. And it could be wrong. So, in a Bayesian way, you gauge your credence in the idea based on the evidence. And if there's new evidence that comes in, you adjust your credence accordingly, up or down. Is there counter evidence? Is it more supportive evidence? That's how to treat it. So specific things like, are UAPs evidence of extraterrestrials visiting the Earth? Well, you can just evaluate it in a Bayesian way. Maybe, probably not, because there's better explanations than the ET explanation. But you never say zero. You never say it's 100% false, because in science we can't do that.
I mean, this is a good segue to consciousness, because and truth. Can truth exist void of a consciousness that gives it its meaning? So the ontology of an apple. What's an apple? Is it food? Is it the object of an artist's affection? Is it a little bridge for a little worm to pass on in a muddy area? What's the truth of this? I mean, you must have something that conceive of that thing to give it its meaning. Otherwise, it's just doing its thing.
Yeah, that's right. So I embrace universal realism. That is, there is a real world. We can know something about it, even if not perfectly. Existence exists. A is A. Postmodernism, fake news, alternative facts. That all truth is relative. There are no truths. This is all nonsense. I debunk all of that in the first chapter. It's quite simple, really, that the claim that we're living in a post-truth world can't be true, because what's the measure that's being used? People that claim this are making arguments. Well, if you're making an argument and presenting evidence, that's not post-truth. That's what we do. So you're still using the methods of rationality to make arguments, whatever, And so probably the more subtle argument would be something like loss of trust in institutions that used to produce facts about the world that we were confident in. So journalism, the media, academia, Congress, the medical institutions, doctors, scientists, all these have come under attack, particularly since COVID. And so trust in institutions that we previously trusted to give us accurate information is low. But that doesn't gainsay the methods themselves. They're sound. It's just that those people that run those institutions may be biased, just like the rest of us. So we saw that with COVID. Just the insistence by public officials and politicians and public health officials to pronounce with great confidence conclusions that were not warranted. When there was huge levels of uncertainty, from the origins of the virus, lab leak or zoonotic, to whether we should wear masks or not, whether you should mandate vaccines, social isolation, closing schools, closing the economy down. These are all issues for which we had very little information and not a lot of history to go on. It's looking like now closing schools was a terrible idea. It was clear within months that the virus was not going to affect children, hardly at all. Primarily targeting older people with pre-existing medical conditions and obesity and so on. Children were largely unaffected. And so the precautionary principle, well, let's just close them just in case. Well, not just in case, because what about the things that you're going to lose by not having schools open? Like education and socialization and
social skills. Yeah.
We're these kids are behind 2 years now, a year and a half to 2 years. Studies are showing. So, and the economy, of course, took a huge hit. And so now we're experiencing inflation for the last 2 years because we issued all those bailouts. Just printing money causes inflation to go up. It's not rocket science. So anyway, but my point is that I would like to see politicians and public health officials and so on be a little more Bayesian in their approach. That is to say something like, "Well, this is a potential disaster. We're really worried about it, but we're not sure. For now, for this week, we're going to close the schools, and then next week we may change our mind. If there's no evidence, or the masks, or here's what we know about vaccines, and this may change. I'll get back to you next week. I'll hold a press conference every week, and I'll just tell you everything we know." I think people would be far more receptive to following the advice of leaders if they were presented information that way, in a Bayesian way. These are provisional truths that we don't know for sure. Nobody knows for sure. So this is what we're going to recommend now, and then next week we may change our mind, and that's okay.
Unfortunately, this is not how the political world is run. People are making points and agendas and getting even with other people based on certain situations. So unfortunately, we don't live in a world that is dictated by information, and the ability to say simply, "I was wrong here. Let me correct my stance." That can never happen because people are too embarrassed, and while doing that, damage their long-term credibility anyway.
Yes, well, in politics, it's a sport in which there's winners and losers. It's a team sport, and you're afraid the other side is going to pounce on you if you say something and it turns out you're wrong, or you change your mind, in which case you're a flip-flopper, which is supposedly a bad thing. In science, everybody should be a flip-flopper. It just depends, not randomly, not just for its own sake, but if the evidence changes, change your mind. That's one of the virtues of skepticism in science.
Now, let's start with consciousness, because obviously you must have consciousness before we talk about free will. An agency cannot have free will unless it's conscious of at least itself and its surroundings. Or do you think this is a bit debatable? Can you have free will without?
So, animals can respond to their environment through learning and change their behaviors based on what they've learned. That's a kind of sentience. They're aware of their environment. They respond to it. Now, they don't have meta-awareness. They're not aware that they're aware. Let's say, the famous red dot test. You put the red dot on the forehead of the chimp and put him in front of a mirror, and he looks at the mirror like, "Oh," and he wipes it off like, "That's me," and that's not normal. And it's possible dolphins and elephants, there's some kind of quasi experiments on this that are debatable, but let's say they pass the mirror test, they're self-aware, but most organisms are not. So for me, the consciousness issue and the free will issue has to do with to what extent you can change your behavior as the future unfolds in a way similar to the way it used to be, but slightly different. And you learn from your past, so you change your behaviors going forward. And to me, that's where volition comes in, especially for humans, where you do have that meta layer where you're aware that you're aware, and that this is what you did last time, and this time you're going to do something slightly different based on what happened the previous time under similar circumstances, and so forth.
So, I always argue that absolute freedom is not possible. Like it's even a God himself, the all-powerful, if existed, could not possibly be absolutely free, because at least he'd be determined by his nature, and that alone dictates a certain behavior.
Yeah. If God is omniscient, could he make a stone too heavy to lift? Well, he should be able to. He's omniscient. But wait a minute, he's omniscient. He should be able to lift any stone, no matter how heavy it is. So you get those crazy paradoxes. The Simpsons even made fun of that. Could Homer eat a donut that was too? What was it again? It was something about eating a donut that was too big to eat, or something like that. Anyways, yeah. So those, to me, philosophical arguments like that it's a little, they're a little too, I don't know, self. Reflective or paradoxical in a way. Look out the window and see what things actually happen, how the world actually unfolds. And so, I've been on this. I have a whole chapter on free will and determinism, and to me, very much turns when people like Robert Sapolsky and Sam
Mm,
Harris, you know, present the "could you have done otherwise" argument.
hmm
So I analyze it this way: that if it was a rewind the tape and play it again and see what happens kind of argument, like Steve Gould used for the evolution of life. If you rewound the tape back to the Burgess Shale level of the Cambrian explosion and let the tape play again, would you end up with Homo sapiens? Well, as Dan Dennett pointed out, if it's a read-only memory tape, then yeah, you'd get exactly what we have because it's just a recording of what already happened. You're just watching the movie of your own life or the history of life or whatever. But that's not the universe we live in. The going forward, there's an arrow of time. So you can't rerun the tape. It's impossible. All you can say is that in the future, there may be conditions similar to what happened before, and you're in the sequence. Now, what will you do? Do you have to do the exact same thing? No, you don't, because the future is not exactly the same as the past. You cannot step into the same river twice, Heraclitus said, because the river is different and you're different. And so those changing conditions and your response to those changing conditions, in which you respond slightly differently or maybe dramatically differently or whatever, based on what happened before, and you can learn and respond to your environment. That's the whole point of brain's capacity to learn. Genes are too slow to change and too fixed, instincts and so on. Brains allow you to, in real time, alter the future going forward, your future behavior based on what already happened in the past. So to me, the whole "could you have done otherwise" thought experiment is just futile. It doesn't help. That's not the universe we live in.
absolutely. I completely agree here. Some hard determinists would argue, though, if you were given the choices between coffee, water, and tea, and you've chosen tea on this instance, you could have easily rewind and chose coffee or water. But if you have never heard of lychee, it's very unlikely you would have wanted a lychee juice because it's not part of the portfolio of choices because you don't even know existed. So therefore,
I don't
but I
even know
think
what
it's
that is. What is
exactly right.
I don't even know. Oh, you're making that up. Okay.
No, no, it's a lychee is a fruit in Southeast Asia. It's
Oh, okay. I
yeah,
didn't
the
know that.
one, the red
Here's
hairy one.
here's my drink. It's up here.
Here's my drink. It's vodka cranberry.
Oh my God. Well, wait a minute. Isn't it the middle of the day there?
It is the middle of the day. Yes, yes. But
Okay.
I like.
Is it at least after 12 noon?
But this is Australia. We do crazy stuff here down
Oh,
here.
okay. That's right. Yeah, that's
So yeah,
I find a lot of these philosophical conundrums to be problematic for conceptual reasons. Like the hard problem of consciousness. What's it like to be a bat or you or whatever? Well, you can't ever know for sure because it assumes that I can, in a dualistic way, I can somehow, the little homunculus in me or the mini me can go over into your skull and see if the red looks like my red. This is not possible. What are you talking about? I cannot become you. I can't become a bat. Just think that my thought experiment instead of a bat is a dolphin. It doesn't matter. So because I live near the Pacific Ocean, we have dolphins right out here in Santa Barbara, and so I can imagine what it's like. Like I jump in there, I got my snorkel and a mask so I can see, and then I have one of those mono fins so I can flap. Maybe I shave my body so I have smooth skin, and maybe I put on some big ears so I get kind of an echo effect, or I don't know what. Anyway, but all that is just to say I'm still a human imagining what it's like to be a dolphin, and now I'm getting closer and closer to kind of understanding what it feels like to be a dolphin. But I would just be a person. I'd still be a human,
agreed.
just imagining what it's like to be a bat or a dolphin. But I can't actually become that. It's that's the problem with that thought experiment, in my opinion. It's like who's the existential novelist, the who wrote about the man who woke up as a cockroach, the
Oh,
metamorphosis. Not Foucault, or no, it was one of those French existentialist guys.
yeah, it's name escaped my mind for sure.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but it assumes that the man wakes up as a cockroach, but the human soul is now in the cockroach, and he's like, oh, this is what it's like to, I mean, this is like the Freaky Friday movie where Jamie Lee Curtis and Lindsay Lohan switch bodies. And
Oh,
now the teenage girl is in the boardroom, and the middle-aged mom is now in high school, and hilarity ensues, right? But this
doesn't
is
work that way.
a
Yeah.
crazy idea. You can't switch body. You are your body.
I,
There's not like this soul floating around in there, and it
I,
migrates up. There
I
was a Steve
think
Martin movie about that.
I think Thomas Nagel came up with the "How is it to be a bat," and I completely agree with you because it requires. Consciousness is not a floating thing; it's an emerging property of a complexity of a system. So, if the system is geared to eat insects, it's complete. Like the bat is completely evolved completely differently, and therefore the way they perceive life and things around them will be based on that particular complexity of the system the consciousness is attached to. You cannot transfer then human consciousness to that sort of biology, and you will still retain human consciousness and understand what a bat would look like. And that, to me, the analogy is flowed.
Exactly right. Yeah, it's still dualism. It still assumes the mind is somehow separate from the brain.
Mm.
It can just float off somewhere after you die. You go off to heaven or the quantum ether or whatever. Or I go over into your skull to see if your red looks like my red. This is just crazy talk, right? This I don't know. Anyway, so I think that's the problem with the hard problem of consciousness. I don't think it'll ever be solved the way it's constructed. Same thing with free will and determinism. I mean, compatibilism is not the opposite of determinism. It's a workaround. It's just saying
Absolutely.
determinism is true.
Yes.
In any given choice, yeah, you could say it was determined, but I'm part of the causal net of the determining universe. I'm self-determining my own future.
Yes.
So now I do something slightly different. You can say, well, but that was determined. Yeah, but I'm part of that. I'm making those decisions. Also, I'm determining things as well as nature and my genes and the environment and whatever.
That's why you would still punish, even though we don't think free will exists, but you still punish them because there's still that vehicle that's carrying whatever damage it has that causes people suffering. You'll still have to, well, you no longer throw tomatoes and eggs on them and put them on fire, but you isolate them at least so they don't further harm the society. So it's the point still
not
exists.
Retributive justice where you
Yes.
punish people, but calculated, rational punishment.
Yeah. It makes complete
isolation. Just lock them up. Yeah.
It's David Chalmers. He's an Aussie philosopher. He's been running around for a number of years. It's hard. You cannot understand how does and I think I did so. I didn't try to plagiarize Daniel Dennett's book because I think it was from Bacteria to Bach. And I've subtitled our conversation today from LUCA to Lemaître. LUCA, the lost universal common ancestor, is the lost cell that is connected to all of us, and Lemaître is the Belgian priest who found out that the universe is expanding. And a lot of religious people would argue, how does this little living thing that is just using splitting to reproduce reaches the point where somebody's painting a beautiful Mona Lisa or coming up with art? What led to that?
Yeah, that's the problem. Well, so Dan's book on that, well, collection of essays, but that particular essay about termite mounds. These are huge, beautiful structures, and he kind of has an analogy with the World Trade Center buildings or the Empire State Building, any kind of high rise or skyscraper. I mean, that's kind of what it looks like. No one termite has any idea that it's living in this big, beautiful structure. It doesn't even know what it's doing. It's just pushing dirt around, whatever they do, mix the dirt with saliva. I don't even know what termites do exactly. But his analogy is that no neuron knows that it's a neuron and it's firing because it wants to achieve some goal, or it's just a chemical process, electrochemical process of swapping ions across a semi-permeable membrane to get to the end of the neuron and the synaptic gap there, and it releases those neurotransmitter substances across the synaptic gap, and that causes the next neuron to fire or not if it's an inhibitory neuron, and so on. It doesn't have any idea what it's doing. It's just a mechanical system. So you're not going to find consciousness or free will or anything like that in the neurons. It's an emergent property, is the way you said it is perfectly accurate, of billions of neurons, neural networks firing in sequence and interacting with other neural networks, and on and on and on. And out of that emerges, and when I say that, I don't mean like, and then a miracle happens. I mean, in the same way that the result of hundreds of millions of consumers acting in an economy to exchange goods and work and labor and earn money and spend money and so on, out of that emerges things like inflation and unemployment, or just take inflation. Where in the neurons is inflation? I mean, what are you an economist would go, what the hell are you talking about? You're not going to find inflation in people's brains. It's an emergent property of a complex adaptive system called the economy. And, so much of, I think, the problems of talking about free will and determinism and consciousness, hard problem consciousness, is reductionism. It's this physics envy. We just got to keep drilling down further and further down to the quantum level or something. Dan also, pointed out that quantum physics and Heisenberg's uncertainty principle and all that doesn't give you free will. All that gives is the system is randomness. That's not free will. That's not the kind of free will you want. That comes that emerges from complex systems higher up. So just think of different levels of analysis are representing. They're kind of mapping onto different ontological levels of stuff that really exists. There really is an economy. There really is something called inflation. And professional scholars and scientists study inflation. We talk about it. Public policymakers and politicians, economists, do things to try to change inflation, make it go down, and so on. It's real. To say, well, if I can't find it in atoms or molecules or neurons, then it's not real. Come on. Look out the window and see there's a real world out there. It's not all atoms and molecules and neurons.
What do you think, Dr. Shermer? I'm not sure if you are familiar with the work of Patricia Churchland. She's a neurophilosopher.
I know Patricia.
Yeah, she's talking about the everything can be made so simple if you track its humble beginnings, because looks like everything is subject to evolution, and if consciousness has started in very primitive way, a precursor of consciousness in smaller organism that seeks to food, for example, and that particular awareness at that point can lead to food, better survival, and you take that all the way to humans, where the complexity of the human condition requires a couple of things, because we're not the strongest. We're not as strong as an ox or lions. We don't have teeth as big as other animals, and all we have is a little bit of intelligence, manipulation of tools, and collaboration. Collaboration requires empathy, and the ability to reflect within yourself and feel what somebody else could feel, to either outsmart them or empathize with them and collaborate on a project that requires multiple people to achieve, would then give you that sort of advantage. So would consciousness then be made complex? And I don't think it's just humans, because you can see glimpses of that in chimps and bonobos, our closest relatives. Could that mean something, that evolution of consciousness from the very simple all the way to the complex?
Yeah, maybe, but we have to be careful not to be too teleological or goal directed in thinking about it as if evolution is moving in some direction. It's not moving in any direction. Most organisms are perfectly well adapted for doing exactly what they do. Sharks are not becoming smarter sharks or whatever. They're just doing what they've been doing for hundreds of millions of years, whatever it is for sharks, tens of millions maybe. It's old, but they don't change. Most animals don't change. They do just fine the way that they are. And the fact that there's a kind of a progress bias in human cognition about how things change, not just randomly so, and evolution is not random, but it's not moving in a direction like toward us. Like finding fossil hominids, Neanderthals or Homo erectus or any of them going all the way back, Australopithecus afarensis, Lucy, or Australopithecus africanus, all the way back. They're not striving to become Homo sapiens. They're just living their lives, just trying to survive and reproduce, just like all organisms do. And it's such a strong bias; it's hard to get past it. And that's why Steve Gould was always pounding on that. That kind of role of contingency. Evolution is not progressive; it's not directional. Now, if you go far enough to the left wall of simplicity, there's only one direction for life to go, and that's to get more complex. But once you move far away from the left wall of simplicity, there's no particular adaptive advantage to being more complex or intelligent, for that matter. Most organisms, there's us, right, and maybe a few dozen others, elephants and chimps and gorillas, and I don't know how far you want to go for talking about intelligence, but most organisms and animals, they're not intelligent.
Mhm.
They're just, and they do just fine. In fact, brains are expensive to run. They consume a massive amount of energy. And why would you allocate all the energy for that if you don't have to do it? If you can survive without rationality, say, or something like that, well, then what do you need that for? So there's no particular reason why intelligence would evolve as an adaptive thing. It could be adaptive. It is for us because we're not the fastest, swiftest, strongest, and so on. But you don't have to have that.
Yeah. So away from the deliberate design, could it have been just naturally selected? So, for example, we understand that there are different groups of humans existed at the same time. The Homo neanderthalensis, the Neanderthal, had a bigger brain than the Homo sapiens. I think once 1,750 as opposed to 1,500. And however, it was not as social as Homo sapiens. And it seemed that being totally sociable and work in bigger groups might have been selected. So it's not like there is no design, but those groups of people who displayed behavior towards collaboration, towards fending off bigger animals, tend to survive and pass their genes, and therefore they were selected.
That's one theory for why Homo sapiens succeeded and Neanderthals went extinct, but there are others. New research on Neanderthals show they were pretty sophisticated and also social. It's almost impossible to live in Northern Europe during the Ice Ages as an isolated individual or tiny groups. Cooperation, prosociality, reciprocal altruism, empathy. All these traits would be good for Neanderthals too. They had clothes, they had tools. It may just be a chance. It could be. I've seen calculations of just breeding rates. Just like a 1% difference in reproductive fecundity between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals in the course of 10,000 years. That could do it. They could just be displaced by other populations just by breeding. And we know we interbred a little bit with Neanderthals. We all have about 2% Neanderthal genes in us.
Maybe they got too smart and they adopted antinatalism.
It could be. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I'm against having babies. It's hurting the environment. There was a Neanderthal Greta Thunberg that said, "Don't have babies. It's going to cause global warming."
You're right. Sometimes I think too much intelligence might end up being an obstacle, because if not the aim, but if surviving is the order of the day, then whoever is good at that will just probably be more successful in surviving, and sometimes it doesn't require much intelligence.
One of the critiques of rationality is that we didn't evolve to reason our way to a better and more accurate understanding of the world in some ultimate ontological sense. Because the point of evolution is just whatever it takes for you to survive, get your genes into the next generation. And if that means winning arguments rather than having an accurate understanding of the world, then so be it. Whatever it takes. And this is Dan Sperber and Hugo Mercier's argument in the Enigma of Reason. Their book Enigma of Reason is that we didn't evolve rationality for veridical perception, accurate models of the world, so much as to win arguments and just be good group members, and whatever it takes to just get your genes in the next generation. And that's a decent argument, I think. Not wholly so. I mean, it's like it does help to understand something about the world in a relatively accurate way. Like, sharks are shaped a certain way and they move in a certain direction and they have a tail on one end and sharp teeth on the other end. And it's good to know that to avoid predation, right? But, there's no reason we need to understand quantum physics and the speed of light and expanding universes and the multiverse. Most of science has been discovered, through a lot of effort that does not map onto the way our brains operate normally in the savannas of Africa. That's why they're so hard to grasp. String theory and expanding bubbled multi universes. It's like, what? And so a lot of it is counterintuitive. Or the theory of evolution. These changes over the course of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of years. Our brains are really wired to think about time in terms of like days, weeks, months, years, decades, maybe at most, but centuries, thousands of years. Yeah. It's just really hard to see that, grasp it.
It seems that you're absolutely spot on here on the subject of winning. We don't. Well, I mean, I can see it practiced to date. I think when I was in debate groups, they will ask you to adopt something and defend something that you don't believe in or you don't think it's true. And I never understood that. I said, like, why would I want to do that? It's not just that, but they show you how to win. And I think the Sophists and the pre-Socratic method or the pre-Socratic era, there were those people walking around trying to show people that they could be wrong in any way. And these are the I think the offspring of which is lawyers of today. They can actually go for a case and they probably know it's the victim has done it, but they will find a loophole in the system to get you out of your dilemma. So it seems that you're right. We don't really seek the truth. We seek to win and establish dominance.
That's a big part of it. Yeah. Yeah. So, the analogy, our brains are more like lawyers than scientists. We just want to win the case. And, that's what all these cognitive biases, motivated reasoning, confirmation bias, hindsight bias, these are the tricks of lawyers to win the case. The whole point, in fact, as a lawyer, you have to defend your client to the best of your ability or else you're fired.
Mm-hmm.
You could be disbarred for not doing that. And they literally fight amongst each other about what evidence is going to be allowed into the court case. To me, just put it all in there. Let's see everything, because that's how a scientist thinks. I want to see all the evidence. Oh, no. We're only going to show the jury that thing right there. I'm going to challenge this. The other lawyers wants to bring in this other information. I don't want the jury to know that. The point is to win. And in science, we can't think of it that way.
Logical fallacies. I mean, most of us would commit them as a sort of an oversight, or you misspeak or something like that. But there are people who would actually study them and become proficient in them in order to use them against the masses. Because if you're in a group of people wearing have a certain alliance, and you can easily dominate them by committing certain things like appeal to popularity, and people go, yeah, this idea must be true. Look how many people follow it, and it seems that you can actually be manipulated.
Yeah, well, that's what propagandists do. That's what politicians do. The whole point of a political campaign is to win. You say, well, I have all these idealistic values that of justice and rights, and I want to do this and that to help poor people, whatever. None of that matters if you don't win, if you're not in office, right?
So absolutely. back onto the sort of the free will, because I think we've covered a lot on consciousness, and people are interested in free will because without free will, the whole theology, a lot of theologies will collapse, because the whole premise is predicated upon your ability to choose good and evil. And this is your free will, and this is your responsibility in front of God. And if you don't meet that responsibility, then you deserve what's coming. But if you are not responsible to start with, or you're acting according to what's being given to you by nature, then how can you be held responsible in the first place? So
Yeah.
they must believe in free will, libertarian free will. No, they can't even be a compatibilist, because the whole thing would collapse. So can God exist within a realm where we're not truly responsible? And when I say that, I mean, if you exchange atom for an atom with a serial killer, an atom for an atom, have his upbringing, everything, would you be any different than the one himself who committed all these atrocities?
Well, again, this is a little bit like the "could you have done otherwise" question, because you're implying that the criminal or the serial killer or whatever could not do differently in the future. But of course, they can. Again, I'm setting aside the guy with the brain tumor, what just completely out of control,
Yeah,
and the only thing you could do with them is lock them up. But the whole point of correctional facilities is to correct them, right? Let's put this guy through anger management training. The assumption is that he can learn, and the next time you feel your temper coming on, count to 10. Here's some strategies you can use before you strike out, and a lot of these programs are successful. Cognitive behavior therapy really does work, and systematic desensitization to conditions that make you act a certain way. You can change those. And again, setting aside the people that just are completely out of control, but we're not talking about those. When most of the free will determinism debates have to do with just me and you, just regular people that don't have issues like that. Okay, so but even so, most criminals are either opportunistic or they're moralistic. Most homicides, for example, something like 90% of homicides are moralistic in nature. That is, they feel that the other person deserved the punishment. They deserve to die because they did this terrible thing to me. And so, but you can work with these people, again, the ones that are not completely out of control due to brain damage or whatever. And so for most of us, you could do different. Even if it was the
yeah.
same atoms, you have a brain and you're able to learn from the past. And I mean, there are problems with recidivism, but other countries have largely solved these problems. The United States is primitive in its criminal justice system compared to, say, Germany and some of the Northern European countries that have abandoned retributive justice, in which we punish people just for the sake of punishment, and instead go for restorative justice. Like, we're going to first fix the problem and right the wrong that was done, and correct the loss to the victims and so on, but also rehabilitate this guy so we can get him back out on the street as a viable citizen, working and living a normal life. And the United States is pretty behind the 8 ball on that, I think.
So I mean, I'm sensing something here. So instead of people, when they think deterministic, they think there's only one path and there's only one thing you could have done. But what if there is a range of possibilities? Exactly
Sure.
like the brain plasticity thing, the fact that you can unlearn, and new synapses can form or deform, the ability to rehabilitate. What if it's more like quantum mechanics? So instead of a deterministic direction you could take, there is a superposition where you can land in different areas depending on different parameters, and you've got a certain range to work with.
Yeah, it's a nice analogy. Of course, not a perfect analogy, because we're not quantum. We're not operating at the quantum level. We're at the macro level. And anyways, I said Dan Dennett pointed out that quantum uncertainty doesn't give you free will. That's just randomness in the system. But that said, these different paths that one can take. I forget what Feynman called that. The path history. Now, what did he call it? This is one of his major fields, but it's escaping me now. That particles could take different paths. Well, you can take different paths. I mean, not completely anything you want to be,
Mm,
but within a channel, you can be a little bit more of this, a little bit more of that. Even things like relatively fixed things like personality traits, intelligence, things like that are fairly stable throughout the lifespan, which is intelligence scores and measures on the big five personality dimensions, which is OCEAN, OCEAN, openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, introversion, agreeableness, disagreeableness, and neuroticism, or kind of emotional swings. So, most of us, about 50% at least, of the variation between people on the big five or intelligence or whatever is accounted for by genes. So, a lot of that I just inherited from my parents. In addition to the home life they gave me, they also gave me genes. And, so like happiness, we know from tons of research on happiness, in behavior genetics. So, identical twins raised in the same environment, identical twins raised in separate environments, siblings raised in the same environment, siblings raised in separate environments, adoptees raised in the same home versus different homes, and so on. So you have the whole range of almost a controlled experiment. And again, more than half of the variants on most of these kinds of traits are accounted for by genes. They're heritable. Everything is heritable, right? But still, that leaves a lot of flexibility there. I can say, look, I'm kind of shy. I'm a bit of an introvert, and I know this. So I'm going to just get myself out there, and I'm going to that party tonight. I'm going to do it. I'm a little uncomfortable, but I'm going to keep doing it until I become more comfortable. And that does happen. I mean, again, cognitive behavior therapy, systematically desensitize yourself to anxiety producing environments. You will be less anxious in those environments. Phobias, anxieties, things like that can be not just controlled, but self-control, right? And so
indeed.
that's what you're talking about, this kind of channel. I can move within the channel. And that's who's doing that. I am. That's me. Well, who's the me? The self.
Mm.
Whatever you want to call that. There's an agent in there making decisions, and that's me.
Some hard determinists sort of argue that even on the quantum systems, and even Einstein for a very long period of time, hence the saying that God does not play dice with the universe. He always alluded to hidden variables. That even under the quantum systems, it's a problem of measurement rather than a problem of ontological status of the quantum systems. That the fact that we don't know is because we don't have the right measuring tools to be able to determine the location of the electron at that particular time, and therefore, deep down, everything is deterministic, but we just not we don't have the right measuring tools, or we're not aware of the complexity of the system, and therefore we think it might be quite random, but deep down it's deterministic somehow. What do you think of this direction?
Well, I'm out of my realm here, but I'm told by quantum physicists that at some level down there, it really is random. I mean, they're just which particles decay at any given time. You can't say. It's not possible to
True.
know. You can say on average, the decay of from potassium to argon happens at this highly predictable rate. So you can use it as a radioactive dating technique for fossils, for example. But which particle in that atom is going to decay? Impossible to say. Okay, this is
Mm.
what I'm told. But it doesn't really matter because we don't live at the quantum scale. We live at the
Mm.
macro scale. The moon really is there tonight, whether I look at it or
Well,
not.
that's yeah.
So,
But some people like geniuses. Well, actually, I think Roger Penrose is misunderstood, because some people are using the quantum consciousness now. There, it's a term
oh, I
that
know.
yeah, the observer effect, and
I know.
yeah. And I
Yeah.
think you had a conversation with Deepak Chopra. I remember this was the hilarious conversation with
Yeah.
Sam Harris, and he was referring to non-locality as a thing.
Look up on Wikipedia the theories of consciousness, the hard problem consciousness. There's like 24 different theories. To me, this tells me that, although to be sure, if you look up interpretations of quantum physics, there's also like 24 different
Yeah.
interpretations. I don't know. At some point, you just kind of hit these philosophical, deep kind of, I don't know, implications of a theory at some level where we can't resolve it, and so you end up, everybody has their particular spin on it,
Yeah.
and it may not be possible to get an answer. It may be maybe what I call known unknowables. After the known knowns and known unknowns and known unknowables, we just can't know. Maybe the limitations of our brains, or maybe it's the time we live in. Maybe 500 years from now, this will all be worked out. I don't know.
I think the answer for me is we've evolved to see things in sort of medium sizes, running in medium speeds, and we
Yeah.
go to that realm. We completely the logic does not the logic that evolved in the savannah does not work with things like that.
I mean, I have a whole chapter on why is there something rather than nothing, the meaning of existence.
Oh, yeah.
At some point, you start taking things out of the room, so it's an empty room, but you got to get rid of the room, and you're in the room, so you were sitting on a chair. You got to get rid of the chair, and there's air. You got to get rid of the air in the room. Pretty soon, you're just a body floating in space. But even that's not enough. There can't even be space. And not to mention there can't be platonic ideas like logic and math and geometric shapes, or I don't know, the principles of geometry. None of that can exist. Even concepts like God, even the concept of existence can't
Yep.
exist if there's truly nothing. So at some point, there's not even existence forever, because there's no forever, because there's not even time.
Even the
And
concept of nothing cannot exist, because if a
yeah,
concept of nothing exists, then it's a something.
it's a something that's a nothing. Yeah. It's like at this point, here's how I say it. I don't even know what I'm talking about.
Well, that's why Richard Feynman said about quantum mechanics. He said, "Shut up and calculate."
Yes.
It works. It works. The fact that we have electronics, which is based on the quantum mechanics of mobile phones, everything that uses semiconductor, so it works. We don't know exactly how it works, but it's useful. We're manipulating it, and we can come up with technologies, and that's good enough for me at the moment.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. We're wrapping up in the next 5 to 6 minutes, and maybe just get all the strengths of this conversation together. These two areas are of the utmost importance to a lot of theists, because consciousness, free will, if these two things, if we start proving that they're product or a byproduct of evolution in terms of consciousness, and again free will, because again back to Daniel Dennett, who's the main reason we're having all these conversations today, we honoring his memory. He said we are not the victims of these illusions, consciousness and free will. We are the beneficiaries. We actually benefit from these things. So the best of the hard determinists, if we have one with us today, would argue with us, but then half an hour later we'll go to a coffee shop and we'll ponder whether the cheesecake or the malt cake,
Yes, of course.
and fall into the illusion one more time.
Yeah, I like to make the point that I've never met a determinist who actually believes their arguments in terms of when they go out the door into the world.
I agree.
Nobody thinks that it's a determined universe. Nobody. They act as if they're free, of course.
So, do you think then, in terms of evolution, do you? And by the way, I forgot to ask you: are you a compatibilist?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So same here. I'm a compatibilist.
My arguments are, it's very similar to Dan Dennett's. Yeah. Yeah. Let me just, make a comment on that since you asked about Dan. I've known Dan since the early 90s. I've hosted him for pretty much every book he's written since the early 90s. I've spent a lot of time with him. We were in the Galapagos together for 10 days on a small boat with just a dozen people. This is when he was writing Breaking the Spell. So he was telling us about it, and I asked him to give us a little talk based on what he was thinking at that time, and he did. It was great. And he's a super nice guy. He's very warm and engaging and so on. I mean, he's got a big ego, but pretty much everybody I've met that I've gotten to know at this level, they're all like that. They all have huge egos. You kind of have to be supremely confident, and you got to be pretty smart to be able to write those kind of books. Steve Pinker, Richard Dawkins, Steve Gould, all these guys are, they're huge egos, but it kind of goes with the territory. My favorite quip came from my friend David Barish, the psychologist, that that Dan Dennett was an arrogant man who had much to be arrogant about.
It was well justified, though.
Yeah. I mean, he was used to, kind of commanding a conversation at a dinner table. So it was always interesting when we'd be out, at these events like TED conferences or whatever, where everybody at the table is a pretty big brain, right? And you could see him like, hey, wait a minute, I'm not the center of attention here. It's like, yeah, that's right.
Well, I remember this conversation with the around whiskey table, the four horsemen of the apocalypse. This is Hitchens, him, Sam Harris, and Richard Dawkins, and they were arguing about religion and whether what's the future of religion. And everybody was astonished when Hitchens said, "I don't want religion to go away." And they said, "What are you talking about? This is the whole reason we're anti-theists. That's why we're fighting." He said, "No, there'll be nothing to argue about." He loves an argument, and
Yes.
and it tells you a lot about the personality of Hitchens.
I always wonder. I knew Hitch pretty well, also to what extent some of his appearances and performances were just performances. Like, this is a debate. It's a game. I'm here to win. Not interested in like parsing different arguments with people and maybe changing my mind. It's a show. I remember one debate we did together. I think it was at Freedom Fest, and afterwards he said, "Shermer, I think that was a good show we put on." And I'm like, "Oh, it's a show. Okay, it's a performance."
He loved it. He's the kind of person, but he's you can't stop but sort of live. He loves to live the drama, and it's part of his persona. He's big. But this is a very interesting question for you here from one of the viewers, asking whether you would be part of the four horsemen of the apocalypse.
Well, when that originally unfolded, it was just kind of a gimmicky line by a magazine. Was it Reason Mag? No, it was not Reason Magazine. It was Wired Magazine, I think. Coined that and featured the four of those guys. I mean, that wasn't really accurate. I mean, whether I should be included or not is a separate question. But like Victor Stenger had a best-selling book out on the God question. The testable hypothesis. God, the hypothesis, I think it was called. Anyway, but I didn't really like the idea of defining myself as an atheist. I've always kind of avoided the word
skeptic.
Skeptic, religious skeptic, whatever. Because it's not a worldview that has a set of tenets that you believe in. Atheism is just a position. There's theism, agnosticism, deism. These are all just words to describe a particular position on one question: the existence of God. What about civil rights and women's rights and gay rights and equal treatment under the law and property rights and free speech and abortion, reproductive rights? What has that got to do with atheism? Nothing. Right. So I prefer to define myself by positive labels like Enlightenment humanism or secular humanism or classical liberalism, something like that, because that's a bundle of positive principles that you live your life by. And atheism really has nothing to do with that. So,
it's a negation. Like you're absolutely right. You're defining yourself based on a negation of a certain position. That's quite shallow and reductionist, and in terms of what else you can offer humanity, and you choose the one little thing to define yourself by. It's quite short-sighted. I think it's I completely agree.
Yeah, Friedrich Hayek or no, von Mises in the 1950s? It's kind of the height of the anti-communism. Cold War scare, and everybody was anti-communist. It's like, well, yeah, okay, but what are you actually for? We can't just be anti-communist. What are we promoting?
That's like intelligent design. Intelligent design, when they went into the 5 cases, the last one was Dover, and they're taking a position against evolution, but they have not provided any evidence of their claim.
Yeah, I mean, their whole argument is God did it. Yeah, that's not a good explanation. It doesn't explain anything. How did God do it? Right? I mean, maybe God used natural selection to create the diversity of life. And if you concede that, then it's okay. What do you need God for? Because it's just a natural process.
Yeah, he's the starter. Do you recall? I think they replaced Hitchens at the time with Ayaan Hirsi Ali. I think she appeared a couple of times.
Yeah, now
she's a Christian now.
Case, actually, let me comment on that briefly. I wrote one of my Substack columns on that. That hers was more strategic and personal. right?
Mm.
That atheism is not a force to counter radical Islamism, for example, or the crazy far left woke progressives. Yeah,
Yeah.
but atheism isn't designed to do that. It's not designed
Yeah.
to do anything, right? Universal realism and commitment to reason and science and secular enlightenment values. That's the counter to radical terrorism and radical left liberal, far left illiberalism.
Yeah.
And Ayan also said in a podcast after that essay she wrote that she had personal problems, alcoholism and depression, and was going through something of a existential crisis. So she turned to Christianity, and it helped her. Okay, well, I'm sympathetic
Wow.
and empathetic to other people's troubled lives. Everybody, we all go through stuff, whatever it takes
Yeah.
to get through the night, right? But that's not a good argument for Christianity. That's just saying I needed help and I got help. Okay. I mean,
Yeah.
I met Isaac Hayes, the great musician, at a Thanksgiving dinner. He was sitting across the table from me, my best friend's home in Atlanta. And he was famously a Scientologist at that time. So I asked him, Isaac, why Scientology? I asked it in a very polite way. I wasn't trying to be provocative. And he just said, well, Michael, I lost everything. I mean, I was at the height of my career. I had, won Grammy awards. I had millions of dollars, and I had everything you could want. And I just, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and I lost it all. And Scientology helped me. They got me started again. Like, okay, well, I mean,
Yeah. The thing
that's kind
is,
of a pragmatic way of looking at religion.
you can achieve almost that kind of comfort with Buddhism, Islam. People, a lot of people say,
Of course.
I love praying to God. I feel so peaceful. And they don't understand that this is the power or the psychological suggestion they give themselves within that practice. And you can replace that with anything, even going to your favorite football match in Anfield in Liverpool and singing the anthem with 100,000 people of You'll Never Walk Alone, or a Metallica concert, and you'll still have the same effect.
Right. That's funny. Yeah.
Fantastic, Dr. Shermer. Do you have anything else to say before we conclude?
Be skeptical.
That's a very good one.
All
Thank
right.
you so much for
right.
turning up again. Have a good one.
All right. Bye-bye. Okay.